Hello everybody, I'm here today with Josh Denny again, and we're going to today discuss chapter 15 of In Search of the Miraculous by Peter Ouspensky. I've recently put up an audio version on the YouTube channel. I'll put a link to it for people that might want to hear it, or if you don't have the book you can listen to it. And the reason I am interested in this chapter at the moment is because I thought it was very relevant to our times, because he talks, Ouspensky's with Gurdjieff in 1916, and he's talking about what is man's role on this planet, what are we supposed to do. He discusses religion, prayer, the involution and the evolution. So I've got Josh here to dissect it a bit more. Thanks for joining me, Josh.
No worries, it's good. Always good to have a chat with you, Debbie.
Well, I thought we'd start with, if that was okay, he starts off the chapter about religion and the difference between the religions that are out there and real religion. So could we perhaps talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So I think he starts off the chapter by saying that I think like something like religion is a relative concept. You know, when people are talking about it, you know, of course we could think we're talking about the same thing, and you know, in reality we talk about different things and not know it. And he kind of says that there's like almost a different religion for every kind of different sort of level of being that a human could be at, you know, for each sort of degree of being or level of being, there's a different kind of religion. And I suppose in terms of like, you know, the specific terminology of the work, there's this idea of like the man numbers, like man number 1, man number 2, number 3, all the way up to like man number 7. And so obviously like man number 7 being the highest sort of man number, representing kind of like the full potential, the full completion of man's potential, you know. So he says that obviously then like religion is different depending on what sort of level of being or man number you're at. So like he says, most people in general are sort of either man number 1, number 2, or number 3. And he kind of says that roughly man number 1 is centered in the body, number 2 kind of in the emotions or the feelings, and man number 3 in the, you know, in the mind. But in each of those cases, it's not really that man number 3 is kind of ahead of man number 1 or number 2. They're each just kind of imbalanced in a different way, you know. But so he says that the religion, say, of man number 1, number 2, and number 3 is different to any of the other, you know, religions of the different man numbers. Like man number 4 is different, has a different religion to man number 5, and so on. So obviously that poses a question then when we're trying to think about what religion is, and specifically like what are the actual variations between different kinds of religions, you know, because obviously our perception on that is going to be determined by, you know, what sort of level of being we're at. And so say that we were, you know, a Christian, then that's like saying even within the Christian religion, there are these, the Christian religion exists kind of as a multiplicity, it exists in these different levels of being. There's a Christianity for man number 1 and like man number 7, like, you know, they can each be Christianity, but a different, you know, level of being of it. So of course there's problems then, you could say, between the interaction of people at different levels of being, even in different religions or even in the same religion, like in terms of how they could communicate and understand each other. Because to an extent it could appear that, say, the religion of man number 5, a man number 5 who's a Christian, to a man number 4 who's a Christian, maybe his religion, like in terms of what he kind of does and maybe the ideas that he talks about, or, you know, things he says and does, can appear like maybe completely contrary or opposite to the religion of man number 4, you know. So obviously that creates problems.
Is that perhaps because as you go up and, you know, become man number 4, number 5, you're having a different understanding of what that religion is, and what the, not religion as a society, but religion of what it's to do, what it's to be?
Yeah. I mean, yes, your conception of like what religion is, like as a concept, is about would be different. And then also like, yeah, your ideas and understanding about the practices, you know. So it's like the difference between them is kind of the doing. Like what distinguishes is the different religions or those different levels, like Christianity at man number 5 level and man number 4 is, you could say that the action that's required to be performed, you know, like at the level of man number 4, there's a particular kind of work that's needed. If you're a man number 5, there's a different particular kind of work that's needed. So that's what kind of differentiates them, is the kind of the doing, the action, the thing that's required to be done, and that can be, you know, varied between the different levels. And so, yeah, it's a kind of a hard thing to appreciate that the religion can actually be really different you know, that the Christianity of man number 4 is still Christianity, even though it can be really different to the Christianity of man number 5. Because again, our normal way of looking at that is just that all these variations are just sort of interpretations of the same thing. And so we are saying that in one level, the man, like the religion of man number 4 and man number 5 are the same religion, but there are these real differences, you know, and there are real differences. They're not just, you know, like to do with subjectivity, because like we're saying, there is an objective task that man number 4 is required to perform. So like there is an objectivity to his religion, his version of Christianity is not just like a subjective degree of misinterpretation, you know. It's not the case that only man number 7's kind of Christianity is true Christianity, you know. And it kind of suggests that there is the need, you know, there needs to be men of each number, you know. We can't all be man number 7. There needs to be people at each level, you know, of development or being, and that's how this, you know, exchange.
And I just wanted to add for viewers, we're not just talking about Christianity as a whole, it's all religions have different levels. But Gurdjieff just uses Christianity as an example, doesn't he? But he's discussing all religions really, Muslim, Judaism, Zoroastrianism, you know, you name it, that can be included in this.
Yeah. And so also like at the start of that chapter, he kind of says that religion is doing, you know, that, and obviously in the work there's this idea that like what man is like required to do is real doing, you know, and that he says that in general we're like machines, and so we can't do. And he says that kind of so if our religion isn't real doing, that it's kind of, you know, a bit of a kind of a sham, you know, we're not like really truly practicing our religion. So he says that in order for our religion to be true, or for us to be like truly practicing it, it needs to be something that we're doing in kind of the three of our centers. It needs to be something that we equally do with our mind and our feelings and our body, you know, so we kind of fully live it, fully participate in it. And I think there's like in that quote where he says like religion is doing, I think he says that so like if you're only thinking your feeling, if you're only thinking your religion, only kind of participating in it with your mind, it'd be like philosophy. And if you're only kind of participating in with it, in it with your feelings, I think it'd be what do you say, like fantasy. So again, just this idea that the three sides of us, the three brains, have to equally participate in this, religion for it to be real, and for it to be doing. And so he goes on to say then that, okay, then if for your religion to be real, that means that you have to do, then of course not everybody can do, and there could be different like stages, if you like, steps towards being able to do. So that's like saying if you're a Buddhist or a Christian, of course in your religion there's different steps for you to be able to become the complete Christian or complete Buddhist, complete Muslim. And so he says that then in that sense, not everybody has the right then, let's say then, to call themselves a Christian, or that people who do often, call themselves a Christian can not really be a Christian because they don't really live up to the full implication of what's implied in that title. So he kind of says that there could be like if we pick Christianity, then different kind of levels of Christian. So there could be the Christian who is only able to kind of perform the sort of tasks, the work that's required of the Christian in, say, his mind. He has a true, say, wish in his mind to do what's required of him to make those efforts, to be a good Christian. And he's like, making an effort to think about what that involves and bring that into his, into his life and contemplate those ideas. But maybe in his feelings, he's still not able to, to live up to the teaching in his feelings. He still maybe has feelings that aren't in accord with this, the wish, or the teaching, that's in his mind. So that implies, and again, that there can be these different levels of how able we are to live up to the full, teaching of the religion. So you might be just able to do it in your mind, your feelings, or your body. And of course, then it's like saying you could maybe be like a third Christian, or 2/3 Christian, or a full Christian, depending on how able you are to bring your kind of three centers or brains together to act as one, to fully embody that teaching and live it in all your whole being. And so again, that sort of implies that we need to bring our brains together, these different centers, these different sides of our nature. And so that, that shows that we don't really have any unity, we lack a kind of inner unity. Like to make a decision, our actions don't really proceed from, you could say, like a singular unified source, or just from like the whole of us. We never kind of make any decisions that we kind of the whole of us knows about, or that you know. So it's like we've got this inner community, and decisions are being made that not all of us are like aware of when they're being made, and we only maybe find out, parts of us find out later, like what, you know. So he gives the example that, you know, of course a Christian may have a wish to be, you know, a true Christian and to truly live up to the teaching, but that wish might only be present in one part of, you know, one part of their nature, you know, one side of them, one of their eyes, you know, one of their parts of their like identity, their fragmented identity. And of course, if the wish is only, you know, present in one part of your nature, and there's maybe, you know, a whole range of other sides of you that don't know about it, then yeah, you're going to have some resistance, you know, to achieve that wish. You know, and that's that kind of that situation of inner fragmentation is what kind of causes us not to be able to achieve our aims, you know, because that's what means we come to forget about it. So it's like saying I can make a wish before I go to sleep, you know, to get up at 8 o'clock, and then when the alarm goes off, it's a different I who's like present then, and he doesn't want to get up, or he hasn't even been aware of the decision, you know. So it's like these different sides of us are not only fragmented and have their different wants and desires, but they're also like unaware of each other, you know. And again, this is kind of a strange concept to ponder, that like your consciousness, your being, is kind of made up of a multiplicity rather than a unity. You know, you don't just have like one awareness, one consciousness, but you have like this multiple awarenesses of consciousness, at least like one for each of your three brains or centers, and that they can really like, yeah, not be aware of each other. So
they were one of my biggest wake-up calls, actually, when I got to the Gurdjieff work. I really noticed that. God, how many eyes I have of like, well, I'm going to do that, but I'll do it tomorrow. And then tomorrow comes, and it's like, oh no, I'm not doing it. That's my like, oh right, that's a different eye, thinking it knows better. Right, okay. For me, it was just a revelation. Revelation, you know.
Yeah. Like not only can we have these sort of different viewpoints that come up, like completely not just different, but even contrary, you know, viewpoints in us. But even like between our three main kind of sides, you know, three brains, yeah, there is this kind of separation or multiplicity that's like, you know, it's like we're not one person, it's like we're three people who are each kind of only partially aware of each other, you know. We think we're one person, but you know, or each side of us thinks it's, you know, takes itself for the whole. Or like Gurdjieff says, we have these multiple eyes, and whenever each one comes into play, it thinks it's the whole. It kind of forgets that there's these other eyes, or just comes to see them as partial and wrong, and it takes itself to be the right one and the king, you know. And that's kind of why when you go to get up in the morning, how that eye can possibly make you not get up, because at that moment it has some kind of greater authority, because it's in the chair, you know, at that moment, so it can potentially, you know, make the sort of decision, even though it's only one small part of you that's making a decision that the whole has to pay the consequences for, you know, at some point. So he says that yes, in order to kind of truly live the religion, we have to somehow or other manage to bring these different sides of ourselves together, or like start to be able to make them aware of each other. There are different like brains to become aware of each other, and thereby being able to kind of share the same decision or work together, you know, towards the same aim. And so although that we live in this kind of state of fragmentation without this inner unity, obviously we kind of have the appearance of like unity and being able to make a decision. You know, we seem to have like consciousness and will and like a singular, you know, self. But yeah, he would say that that's just like the mechanical appearance of being able to make a decision and do. So again, in like reference to the teachings, he says that, okay, then in Christianity, there can maybe the teaching that says, you know, you have to turn the other cheek. But if I don't have an inner unity, then I don't really have any guarantee as to how I'm going to respond when someone slaps me. You know, how I respond is just going to depend on which eye is present, like, you know, at the given moment. So, I mean, so yeah, let's say that if there's kind of a random element to what eye is, you know, present when I get slapped, then maybe I do turn the other cheek, and that kind of looks like I'm being like really compassionate. But he says that could just be like a mechanical, you know, cheek turning, not like really done with, you know, true intentional consciousness, or like that's coming from the whole of you. It might just happen to be the eye who has that opinion maybe that it's good not to, that it's good to turn the other cheek, or maybe just can't do anything other, that eye just happens to come about. So again, he presents us with that question of what is like true, authenticity, like what is the inner side of that rather than just our outer behavior. We can externally appear to be living up to the, teachings like Christianity, appear to be externally doing all the steps that are required. But if that's mechanical, then he kind of says that it doesn't really have the value. So in one sense, you're not really the Christian or really living up to what it's supposed to be about, even though externally you might be doing what is considered to be like good action, being a good Christian.
Because with all this, also it's also a part of your whether you're on an esoteric or a mesoteric or an exoteric part of your religion, which is something Gurdjieff and Ouspensky discuss in this chapter. And I feel that's quite linked to it, isn't it? Because if you're in the exoteric, then you're in the outside, and you probably aren't putting everything into it because you're just following routine, following the rituals, following what you're being told to say and do.
Yeah. Well, like he says, depending on your sort of level of being and understanding, that's going to determine how you view the religion and what you're sort of able to do and how you engage with it, what level of engagement you have with it. And like, for example, he goes on to talk about prayer, doesn't he? He says, so like, prayer is a big part of, in some form or another, like all religions, they all have kind of versions of prayer, you could say. But again, he says, like, for most people who are engaged in a kind of formal religion, their practice of prayer and their conception of prayer is like, completely at the odds to the reality, almost like the opposite, and is kind of mechanical in nature, So he says that most kind of conceptions of prayer just involve a petition. They're of the form of a petition, and they're just kind of almost like mechanical repetitions. Like a person might be just sitting there saying, "Oh, like, please have mercy, God have mercy, God have mercy," And he says that because, again, they're just kind of performed automatically, not from the whole of us, they can lack in their results, and obviously there can be the lack of understanding of how we're supposed to perform those prayers. Like people might think that they are supposed to be performed maybe in just that sort of mechanical, repetitive way. They might not know that they're supposed to be performed in, there could be some vague ideas of having a certain emotional attitude, but more than that, people might not really have any sense of what's supposed to be going on there, or if there is a manual, like to how to pray, they maybe that they don't seem to receive them.
If you say it enough, maybe God will hear it.
Yeah. So again, he kind of criticizes that, like, the normal attitude to prayer. So he says instead of it being like a mechanical repetition or petition, it's supposed to involve some kind of internal, like, invocation or evocation of what's inside you. So like whatever word that I'm like uttering in the prayer, I'm supposed to kind of, you could say, contemplate on as I utter it, or prior to uttering it. So like it says, like, say the first word is I in the prayer, then you're supposed to, like, kind of, in one sense, be able to bring all the data, the totality of like data, experience, ideas that's in you about I, kind of before yourself, and kind of, again, in a like three-centered way, kind of not just a theoretical way, but like a lived experience way, so that every word that you say in the prayer becomes a real experience and serves to show you, in a way, what you've got in you, the actual stuff and ideas that you've got in you in regard to this or that word, and the concept or the idea that it relates to. It says that if prayer is kind of used in that way, then that process itself, like the the kind of intensity of attention or whatever that's needed to do that, and that process of being like going through, being kind of showing yourself all that's in you, you can kind of learn from yourself because you kind of like see what's there. And because you kind of bring it before yourself in a lived way, like, again, you're trying to connect your centers together as you do this, it becomes like a real experience to you. So you can gain insights not just into the data that's in you, but it can kind of be transformed in that process of like really experiencing it. Because again, this data that we maybe have acquired in that state of fragmentation, data that maybe only certain parts of us knows about, that hasn't been communicated to the whole of us. So when that information gets the chance to be kind of communicated to the whole of us or exchanged, there can be like this,
It's like working on you, because words are special anyway. They're like, especially in, if you look at it from a magical tradition, or even the world started with a word, putting that power into them words and to really feel what you're trying to say, rather than like you're saying, just a little petition, don't let me get COVID, that kind of thing. But really, please don't let me get COVID.
Yeah. Well, exactly like he says, most prayers are they're really only about probably saving your own skin or getting what you want. Even if it appears to be in the form of praying for others, you may be just praying because you want some ease of this worry or concern for others or whatever, and they tend to only be like mechanical petitions. But exactly, so the idea that there needs to be that kind of intensity or quality that you're saying that you put into the words, in terms of really being able to see or bring before yourself, put into that word the truth of what's in you. So it's more like not about trying to adopt a certain attitude that you've been told, but really to confront the truth of what's in me. What is my present understanding of the word God, or I myself, or suffering, or whatever again happens to be the words or the ideas in the prayer. So again, it's like trying to be an honest like self-confrontation. So it says that if you engage in prayer in that way, it can kind of be self-fulfilling, or almost like self-fulfilling prophecy, that if you pray in that way, then that very process can kind of give you the results that you were like asking from God. It's like because if I have that, say the prayer involves a petition, asking for a specific thing, or maybe a question about a specific thing, then it's like if you pray in that way, then you will gain an insight or new insight and understanding into that thing that you're after, or that question. So there will be some like literal progress made. You could say the answer of the prayer will come. So again, there's that idea in lots of traditions that if you know how to pray, or like, and there's ideas there of authenticity and stuff, that it's kind of like guaranteed an answer. So this is kind of another take on that in a way. But of course, that the answer to the prayer might not be what you think it is. Like, it could be understanding in this case, which could show you that what you thought you're after wasn't really what you're after.
Yeah, none of us what we really desire isn't what we really need, is it?
Yeah. And then, like, after talking about prayer in the chapter, again, if we try to like skim through the bits quickly, then he goes on to talk about like each religion having different rituals. Like each religion have its practices, like prayers and things like that, or its ideas of some form of practice, and it has its each religion seems to have some form of ritual, ceremonies, things like that. And again, he says that over the course of time, most of the information that was like imparted into those rituals, or like the purpose why they were created, has been lost. So the situation is like, for a Christian, the average Christian or the average Muslim, whatever, the people are engaged in these rituals, but they don't really have any understanding of what the true meaning is, the true inner content. He says they're almost like, books. Each ritual can be, or like a library of books each ritual contain information, the amount of information that's in maybe hundreds of books or something like that. It's like what he says. But that's screened from the average kind of participant or practitioner of each of the religions. So he takes the Christian, rituals, for example, and says that, again, in their sort of inception, creation, they were, created intentionally as almost like you could say, like, again, like a school, almost like textbooks, so he almost suggests there's something more like logical, what we would conceive as like a textbook, so specific information, about things, rather than just, mystery, or something that's just something that we think through participating in it is going to just have an effect on us by like automatically. People can think that just by engaging with the ritual, I'm going to be transformed because of the nature, of the ritual. Whereas he was saying that they were more like presentation of lectures, almost like a presentation of information that the people would go there and take in, and then would, go and contemplate on that information, and maybe come back, like he talks about them being like periodic rituals. So,
because that is one of the important things about religion, and just studying any kind of esoteric or divine religious text, is the pondering. It's not just a rational story for you to read and get answers from. You're supposed to go and think about what you're studying.
Yeah, yeah. And just like this idea then, yeah, that in some of the religions now, or in the practitioners' minds, there can be this idea that they're going to be changed just by their participation, in the ritual, or like just witnessing it. And of course, there can be, certain things can happen just through, like, through engaging with the ritual or seeing it and stuff. People kind of insights and stuff. But yeah, he's saying really more what's contained in them is much more information, and much more specific information about like how to do what is required. So Gurdjieff says that again, in our modern position, we only have the information that's come down to us, the information that's left from the different religions and their teachings. It's just more about like what it is that you're supposed to do, or the aim. But all the information as to like how you're supposed to do it, that side of it has been lost. He says that's only kind of maybe been retained in some of the esoteric sides of the different religions, and that they've maybe gone underground and stuff. So at least for the common practitioner, he's saying that there isn't really any one whole side of the religion is missing. The you could say the inner side then, or this how, the how to, like people can have an idea of the sort of what, the aim, even if they might have a limited, in an objective sense, conception of that. People can have some, sense of the what, like some notion of like what to be a good Christian, is about. But they might say, okay, yeah, I have a fair idea or summation of what that's about, but how can I do it? I don't seem to be able to, I'm making efforts, but I don't seem to be able to make, progress. So then, there doesn't seem to be any direct knowledge as to, how to make progress. They can go and see the priest or that, and maybe they might suggest things. But again, they maybe don't get any results from that, or the priest's knowledge, of course, can be the same. It can be very limited, if they're in the same position. So I think
they're just passing on what they've been taught. Many priests probably don't think about what they're being taught and go off and ponder about it so that they can be ready. Some do. I know there are some wonderful priests of all religions out there that have wonderful ways of explaining things to people.
Yeah, I just think you say that it's so rare, relatively now, for a priest, then someone in that position, to have like a significant level of like development of being, like being a higher level of being, and having that sort of understanding of the situation, because like you say, most of the people in those positions have only they're a product of their conditioning. And it's like if you're not exposed to those kind of ideas, or you're around people who are maybe of a higher level of being or understanding, then you're not going to, it's unlikely that you're going to know that, or that's going to come to you somehow. And I think he like goes on to say that like the origin of some of the Christian rituals and practices and stuff comes from Egypt. Like, so he kind of says that there's like been Christians before Christ. Have there been Christians since the time of the Egyptians? And so he says that with the incarnation of Christ, that they sort of took from the Egyptian rituals that they knew about, or again that some sort of esoteric line had continued that knowledge on from, and they embodied that back into the into the teaching that became the Christian teaching.
It's like this wisdom's been with us throughout human evolution. Like, so it's been there from the start. And that's why it never gets lost. It might get hidden, and as Gurdjieff himself says, he hasn't brought a new teaching. He's bringing back teaching, isn't he? That's been lost and forgotten for a while.
Yeah, it's like the the teaching, even if we talk about maybe even in different lines of teaching, they could disappear or appear to disappear and re-emerge. And also that let's say when they re-emerge, then, or even during the time that they maybe disappeared, that people are not only preserving them, but you could say also trying to contribute to them, to develop them. And that contribution can be in the terms of sometimes maybe re-expressing those ideas, the teaching in a language or form that's suitable for the given times. Like that idea is present in Sufism and also in like Gurdjieff and Beelzebub's Tales, that the teaching is, like, you could say, renewed with each generation, and part of that, they have to tailor the teaching, has to be given a suitable form. So there are changes, you could say, in the presentation of the teaching or its form, even though you could say its essence, it's still the same. But in order to connect with people, it has to be put in a suitable form, which changes over time, because people's culture and even mindset, can change over time. Yeah. So like again saying that in order to fully participate in those kind of rituals or understand them, you need to have some kind of context that there's like that there's something more there. If you don't know that there's another side to these rituals, then yeah, you don't kind of have any knowledge or any idea of how to pursue that. So yeah, you need to have some kind of context, some notion that there's another side to them. And again, in the work, there's kind of the idea of the magnetic center and stuff, as in what maybe helps people to have some sense that there is another side to their religion, and if there is something that kind of pulls them or makes them be able to come into contact with some of these ideas, then, you know, again, in the work, there's the idea of these different influences, like A influence and B influence and C influence. So like C influence represents like true conscious influence, like you could say the truth teaching, and the B and the A represent more watered down versions of it, where A becomes just like it's complete opposite, you could say, you know. So, but again, most of us are already exposed to the kind of the A influence version of the religion, you know. So there needs to be something, whether it's from the conditions that we're born into, or something that we're maybe born with, like this magnetic center that can enable us to, you know, pull us towards this more hidden or forgotten about side of it, you know, of the religion.
Because it is
And
about
so,
if you can get that magnetic center aligned, working, it does come to you, doesn't it, from different directions. You know, you don't know how or who or what, but something will happen. Sounds quite magical.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I agree. I think it is. I mean, you know, look, pretty much everybody, seekers of all kinds who write, you know, autobiographies. I mean, whether you regard them as fact or fiction or not, but they all seem to have, like, you know, these kind of experiences where things turn up that seem to be coincidental or, you know, some kind of miraculous happening, you know. So yeah, definitely there's that saying that if you have something within you, then yeah, that will, you know, kind of guide you in some way. But it might only be able to present you with opportunities that you still might have to, you know, make use of or not. So even this potential that you can be given, there still might be some, you know, uncertainty, you know, lack of guarantee that it can come to fruition.
Because even
So
when you start on this path, things come into your way, don't they? Like perhaps books, or, you know, suddenly you hear of a group or something, whatever you're studying, and then it's down to you as to whether you pursue it. And then the coincidences, really synchronicity maybe, continue, don't they? Or giving you hints and guides and directions that points to the right way.
yeah. So like, and again, especially maybe particularly with the fourth way, there's that idea of like continual, you could say, development. So there can be that kind of continual process of say looking out for or making those connections, so that that kind of way, it always has some kind of novelty to it, doesn't it? Do you see what I mean? Some freshness. Yeah. So, but so yeah, he talks about that difference, doesn't he? Saying that there's the kind of the knowledge of the what of the religion, what you're supposed to do or what the aim is, and also this knowledge of the how, but the how side of it has become lost, you know. And so hence there's the ideas of it being like the esoteric, you know, side of the religion. It's lost knowledge or special, you know, knowledge. And part of that side is expressed in these rituals, but it can be kind of hidden. So it kind of needs another mode of engagement. We need to be able to like have a certain inner state or degree of integrity or being to be able to like receive this other information or this other side of it that's there. So that's partly in terms of being able to have some influence on our state, and also partly again in terms of who are the people around us who are giving us ideas, you know, maybe help towards, you know, connecting with that, engaging with that. And he says that part of this kind of inner side, the kind of how, part of it can involve, yeah, the inner practices, the inner exercises, you know, the inner side, inner practical work of the different religions, like inner meditations, inner work, whatever, however you want to call that, but inner work. And that again, all the different religions have their own versions of that. And he goes on to talk about one kind of exercise in terms of he gets them, this is like, again, with him, and I was talking to Ouspensky in his group then at that time, saying, you know, where does this, if you say I, you know, inside yourself loud, where do you kind of feel that resonate, you know, where do you feel like that I is, or where do you feel like you're kind of saying that from? And that it does seem that people have different, you know, different senses of where the kind of eye is in them, that some people it's more in the head or in the chest, or again they tend to be low connected to the chakras, one or other of them, those locations. Like it's not usually for some I feel myself to be right on my my clavicle or whatever, but
There's
they
some
tend
devil
to
on your shoulder saying that, pretending to be I.
yeah, oh I
Yay!
yeah, oh I my fingernail. No, most people it's one of those, usually like the head, the heart, or kind of the the abdomen. But so he says, say that with it eye kind of, inside yourself, and kind of like listen, feel, sense the kind of vibration of it, if you like, the vibration of that word, that sound, and maybe see if it kind of you feel that vibration resonating or being more present in some or other part of you. And so he says that that was used as a kind of a practice, being able to evoke or connect with the sense of I and where it's currently kind of connecting with your body more. And also then the further exercise or development of it, of being able to move intentionally that sense of I, being able to bring the sense of I to whichever, one of your centers you want, and to move, to cycle that sense of I through the centers. So again, that being an exercise towards this task of bringing some consciousness, you could say, to the centers or brains, or being able to bring them into a more kind of conscious connection. So again, this effort to bring a kind of a wholeness where there's some mutual communication, mutual knowledge, awareness of each other, of these brains, so that we can come to act in a more whole way. But he does suggest again here with his ideas of like the subconscious and unconscious, that setup, like having the subconscious and conscious, is part of our nature, and is part of like having this three brain nature. That the fact that the three brains can be like unaware of each other is partly to do with the fact that we have this kind of apparent setup of a subconscious and conscious, and there's some sort of relationship or separation between them two. Again, it's like he suggests that the consciousness and subconsciousness can be more or less aware of each other, or in more of a less sort of mutual relationship. Like he talks about his work of trying to get the subconsciousness to participate in our waking consciousness. So again, there could be different degrees of doing that or realizing that.
To do that, you've got to really will it, haven't you? Really want it.
Well, yeah, you've got to, like he says, it's got to be an effort, a desire, and not just desire, but an effort that's present in your, in all of your natures. You try to, needs to be a fully sort of mobilized desire and effort to, to be able to kind of have a result or an effect. But so in this like effort to bring the three brains together, you could see that you're in a kind of a strange position, because it's like saying, he says that, okay, then as you are, you're fragmented, you have no kind of I, you're just like this collection of eyes, and you have these like separate brains or sides of yourself that are aware of each other. But of course, when I'm talking to you, I have to kind of address some you. So even just by me talking to you there, I appear to be addressing or talking to you as if you had an I, so I'm talking to some given I. So it's like saying that the work seems to have to, in terms of your subjective efforts, start from one or other, if you like, of these like fragmented, eyes, or just the fact that it's starting from this position of a lack of communication. So immediately, even when you're engaging with the work or these ideas, you're receiving it or engaging with it in a kind of, fragmented way, so that maybe some parts of you aren't aware of it, or maybe understanding it completely opposite, and some parts of you are maybe making efforts towards it, and some parts of you maybe like making efforts against it.
No, I don't want to do it.
Yeah. So it's hard to appreciate that, get some sense of that position that we're starting from, trying to get some sense of that, and how that's going to influence like our approach and our efforts, how we see and conceive of what we need to do and how. But so I suppose that means that the I that we're starting from obviously isn't, you could say then this unified I. So I suppose you could say that relative to that I, then that little I, there's going to be some sense of other to these, there is obviously some boundary, there's some sense of other to these other parts of our nature, and there can be, because it's experienced as other, that could be in well, a whole host of ways of how we can relate to these other, and maybe one given eye gets on with one particular eye, but not, not another one. So the one that it has a certain affinity with, it's more likely to be allow into its kind of awareness or have some communication with, whereas one that's maybe opposed to it, it's, more likely to be more buffered from, So there's this like question of how can we approach the teaching or like receive it, these ideas again, try to let the ideas land or become communicated to all these different sides of our nature. And this idea that the eye that we've kind of begin the work with is obviously not going to be, you could say, the kind of eye that makes it. Do you know what I really feel like? It's not the same, because what we take to be eye is not the real eye. So again, this reflects in our idea of our conscious and our subconscious. We normally take ourselves to be the consciousness, the conscious side of ourselves, rather than the subconscious. And of course, we tend to regard the subconscious as something lesser. Most of us, we don't see, because we seem to have to be reliant on this little consciousness. Everything seems to be down to me in general. I mean, obviously, I'm not responsible for my breathing and stuff, but in terms of like my daily actions, it all seems to be reliant on this little consciousness. So this is like to say, I don't really see, or this consciousness doesn't really see the extent, obviously, of course, to which this subconsciousness is you could say controlling or taking care of our life, or being the one who's doing everything. Okay, we think we're the doer and that everything is happening through our kind of intention and intelligence. Yeah, but we don't have really much sense of this other side of ourselves. And again, because it's like buffered. Sometimes we have rare moments of like clairvoyance or some things like that, intuition, where like there's some sense of another kind of knowing that's present in you other than your own conscious mind, your own machinations. So it's rare for us to have that sense of this other side of our nature. So obviously there's that screening to it. So we're kind of in an exaggerated position, I think, in terms of what we think we are actually responsible for, what we do. So this again reflects in the work that I can think that it's all going to be down to this little me, this conscious side of myself, in terms of like the efforts that are needed and who's going to make this happen or not. I might not have much of an appreciation of that. It's not necessarily something that needs to be done by me. Obviously, I have a role in that. This consciousness side has. But more, it's about trying to establish some communication with that other, much more massive side of ourselves, or what he calls real consciousness and subconsciousness. Somehow being able to establish a relationship. And again, in the work, one of his expressions of that is in terms of remembering yourself. Like he says, you need to make these efforts, your little consciousness, to try to remember yourself. And you can try and create like alarm clocks and associations that will kick off to like alert you. But at the end of the day, because that consciousness is relatively small and has limited capacities, it's never going to be able to do it in terms of like making you be able to remember yourself without, completely without a stop or anything. Because it's not, it's not up to the job. So it's like that wish, that desire to remember myself needs to, you could say, pass or be communicated to my subconsciousness, or just that desire. There needs to be some connection between the subconsciousness and the consciousness, such that if the subconsciousness is engaged, then it has those much more massive capacities. So it's much more able then to, you could say, bring something to my attention that needs to be brought to my attention, rather than me just being limited on my own kind of eyes to try to see what needs to be brought to my attention. Obviously, the subconscious has a much more bigger view. So I'm just saying that that can present a different kind of notion of what real eye is going to be then. Again, it's not just going to be like me, this consciousness, but better, improved, and like with a golden body. It might be some other kind of form of consciousness, like he says, the real consciousness, like subconsciousness, And again, that might not just be a process of like me becoming, we think it's going to be like a process of me kind of becoming aware of that or something like that. I think it's just more like maybe developing this this relationship, such that there's that other side of us becomes more active, and like you're saying, bringing things to our attention that need to be brought to attention. Like that could be people, coincidences, whatever, but it's something that can knows what you need. So this is like again linked to his conscience, like something that knows what's needed for you personally, and personally good for you, right for you, can help you. And he says this is in the subconsciousness, or buried in it. So again, it's not like that necessary conscience needs to become something that this consciousness can do, or some knowledge that it gains, but more that it's something it can connect to that's already there, but needs to become active in their subconsciousness.
It's like being more aware, kind of a superpower to be aware when you're really aware, but isn't it? It's being more aware of what's going on in some ways.
Well, I just think of if you think of your awareness as just like, again, it's a traditional metaphor, just as a circumference. Imagine it as like a little light in the dark, a torch light. That torch light could be of a certain size, and maybe like can sometimes be bigger or smaller, and whatever's in that circumference is lit up and is seen. But there's always, you could say, no matter what size it is, there's going to be something outside of it, or it's maybe like what we're saying, it's impossible for that consciousness to become fully aware or to like expand to the the size of the whole. It has maybe certain limits and certain properties, and that's why we may be given like a consciousness and a subconsciousness. Like we need these two kind of forms of consciousness, even though he says they've come into a negative kind of situation or relationship, and our kind of subjective take on it's completely the opposite. Like again, saying that what we take as consciousness is the fictitious, and the real consciousness is looks more like what we take as a subconsciousness. So yeah, I'm just saying that development, then I need the consciousness needs to be more aware, but there also needs to be some connection with what is outside of my awareness, the other part of me, that's subconscious, that can be aware of much more, but only because it's aware in a different way. So yeah, it'd be more like trying to be more aware in a moment, like your attention consciousness being increased, but also having some sort of backup, you could say, with something that's outside of that. In the work, there's also like the talk of the different centers, like your body, your instinctive center, it works at way much more of a faster speed than your mind, or the centers that you subjectively have access to. So again, if there's some better connection or communication that comes between them, then they're doing their job. So then you've got these other sides of yourself that operate at a much higher or faster level than your given consciousness working with you. So I just want to say that development that way towards real I might not look like some intensification of just our normal consciousness. That can be involved, like developing it, but also this other subconscious side of it as well coming more into play.
We've got about 7 minutes left.
Oh right, oh dear.
It's gone quick, isn't it?
Yeah.
Is there anything that you think we should really cover that's important?
Well, like you're saying. Well, like you say, roughly like the rest of the outline of the chapter, he goes on to talk about the role of like humanity in the cosmos being again a means for the transformation of energies, that are needed to feed all these different levels that are present in creation, or the universe, and this exchange of substances and energies that is required to keep it going. So he says that humanity is like the organ of perception of the earth. So it's like the means through which the earth, experiences then and kind of receives food, because like our experiences are one of our sources of food. So because that's where we are, or that's the kind of role we serve at that level, being an organ of perception of the earth, we're at a certain place, like in the cosmic scheme. And because we're like an organ of perception or a means of like gaining food transformation, that's what gives us certain potentials. Like because we're at that place as man, we have the potential ourselves for transformation. Like you could think that in a relative sense, certain places are more static than others, or just that certain places in this cosmic chain have different potentials. So where we are gives us these kind of evolutionary transformative potentials, and they're given to us because we need them. So it's like, because we're that sort of organ of perception of the earth, a means for it to like receive information and impressions, and for it to eat and grow and develop, we ourselves have to be able to grow and develop to continue to serve that purpose. So part of our purpose, he says, is in a general sense to just provide energy that's needed for the whole universe, the whole cosmos.
And for developing our planet as well.
But also, same life on Earth and man. We have a specific role in general. Some, like you could say, some energy goes to the total cosmos. Some energy goes to like the Earth, because we're like its organs of perception. So we're like a part of the body of the Earth. And also some of our energy goes to specifically the moon, which he says represents the kind of the growing tip of like the tree of creation. And so he says that process of creation, the tree, if you imagine it as a tree, is going on all over it. Like growth is happening at every place in that tree. Could say really, it's not localized anywhere. But if you were going to localize it, you'd say it's on the very outer tips, the fresh buds on the very outer edge of that. You could say that's where, growth is. And so that's like where he connects to where the moon is and connects us with it, saying we have to, because we're situated next to that tip, that growing end, again, we have to be growing and changing to provide the energy that's needed, ourselves. And that's what gives us this kind of potential as man for like almost unlimited or continued evolution and development. And part of the like we have that role to play, to create these particular energies or transform them, and that we need to evolve. I think he kind of says that there is the appearance, or can be the appearance, that we've kind of stopped evolving, that we're in a kind of state of stasis, in which case he says that can only be maintained for so long before things either develop or degenerate, So if we can't kind of keep up again with what we need to produce, then we might have to kind of disappear in some form, and something else might, have to come and take over, or maybe even there can be that whole part of the tree, that whole bud can die, because obviously the tree can lose a certain amount of leaves before it dies itself. So there's a certain amount of death that can happen, or failure, but obviously that can only get to a certain point, or else the whole thing, the whole thing fails.
And that is all about us developing, isn't it? If we develop wrongly, then we're not doing the right thing for the cosmos, which, as you were saying, he's saying that it's become a bit, we seem to be at a stasis where nothing's happening, and it can go either way. And it does kind of feel that that's happening. I think one of my friends said that we're de-evolving, or maybe Gurdjieff would use that word today, I don't know, but instead of we should be evolving, and we're not. So we're mucking it up.
Yeah, well, he says we kind of appear to be maybe at a point of stasis, and that's because like any new influence that comes, maybe a positive influence to help, is immediately cancelled out by like an equal and opposite force. So that like there could be this balanced system. If you get to that point where any impetus for help is immediately met by an opposite, you're stuck. You can't go anywhere. So he says there can appear to be that situation, that these different influences, like for and against, have become kind of equal and opposed. So that nothing can happen. No new change. So he kind of suggests then that in that position, how can new change come about? If any like individual effort produces opposite effects, and that's like a theme present in Beelzebub, like how can you do or act to try to help without making things worse? How do you deal with the ripple effects, the domino effects, that causes? So it suggests that the effort that's going to be able to help or change things is going to be of a different kind of nature than we're used to kind of thinking about. Like if you've got that kind of a balanced system where any individual effort just gets counteracted, it's like playing a chess player who's yourself, like playing a clone, it'd be like playing a clone of yourself at chess. How can you win? You'd have to like do something different, somehow go against your habitual, nature, something creative. So the idea is that the work then, or these, whatever is the means for that, it's going to be creative, and it's going to look different by necessity to what we're going to conceive as what's needed, or what can actually change things. So one idea of that kind of work or effort is like something systemic or non-local, or we'd have to use words like quantum, but something that doesn't operate like in the objective sense that we're used to, like some action proceeding from one localized place to another, because it's like that form of action can only have the domino effects, in which case you can't guarantee results, and you can't, you have to continually keep topping it up. It's like you set off the dominoes and then you have to keep directing them so they don't, they go where you want. So yeah, it suggests that the work is going to be some kind of other form of action that's like higher dimensional, to our conceptions. Like quantum, that's the nearest sort of common reference that people might have for something like that. Because we're in that position, then that what we need to do might be, might appear the complete opposite to what we think. He says that our kind of efforts to do the right thing, like to ease suffering and stuff, might be completely opposed. Like he says that we might achieve what we think is the good and peace, get everything fine and happy, and then maybe the world blows up because that peace wasn't needed. We actually needed some strife. So he says
we've
that
got enough of that in the moment. So
yeah, I know. Yeah, so yeah, maybe it's a balance. But he says that suffering and like what he says, inequality are maybe needed, and specifically in terms of the human, what they're required to do, like these energies. Part of those energies that is needs to produce might come from suffering in some different form, that experience, you know. So that might be needed. So if we're trying to reduce suffering, then we might never be able to do that because we're trying to act in a way that's counter to what our purpose actually is. So yeah, there's this question of how can we find our purpose, really see that, and then work in a way that's in alignment with that. And also there's maybe room there, only a certain amount, for how, you know, peaceful, pleasant we can make, you know, we can do that, you know. But yeah, just that idea that, yeah, what's really needed and suffering stuff can be, you know, opposed to our general idea. Like he says, his classic thing, it's not all roses in the higher worlds. You know, maybe heaven's not about just being happy, or maybe what's desired for on earth is not just the normal idea of peace and happiness, which again is can be a hard one to take, because most of us seem to, you could say on average, have some desire for peace, you know, or just an easy life, you know. Whereas for him,
there is a difference, isn't there? Do we want peace or do we want an easy life?
Yeah, well, I just mean by peace, just
I know what you mean.
You know what I mean, an easy life in terms of just being pleasant, not all the horrors and stuff like that. Not necessarily that we don't have to work, but just not the really negative side of it as we see it. And in terms of like this process of how existence or creation is maintained, like there's this kind of cycling of energy. The two halves of that cycle are like involution, stuff, material coming down from a higher level down, and evolution, stuff going up. And he kind of says that, yeah, at every level, there's the two directions of movement are happening. And relatively, if you take some level like life, organic life, then there's parts of it that are evolving and parts of it that are involving. And so he talks about cells, like he says, there's this like the cells of life that are evolving cells, and then the other involutionary cells, which are the more, you know, the majority, just serve as at one level as a means, like for these evolutionary cells to feed on. So it's like the majority of man has a certain particular role to play that's more, you know, generalized, whereas the evolutionary man, or these cells who kind of all have another different function, but they're both equally needed, but they're needed in a different ratio or proportion. Like there's always a smaller number, they're always the minority, the evolving cells. So that suggests that there's never going to be some place where there's only going to just be evolving cells, because there wouldn't be the means for, you know, transformation. It has to be both involution and evolution. So again, that's his thing, that if there has to be those two kind of movements, or that situation of like difference in numbers between the evolutionary and the involutionary, how can there be harmony or balance, you know, because that seems to always suggest to us, like we say, suffering and inequality, you know. How can we deal with that situation? I'm just looking at my notes. Yeah, so in that process,
you've got to be somewhere, haven't you? Do you still want to carry on, or do you?
I'm just checking the time. I could give it, yeah, it's well, so far as my clock says, it's 5 to 9, okay. So give it another 10 minutes. But I was just saying that, yeah, in that process of like evolution and involution, or you can imagine it as like an outflow and an inflow, or like a heartbeat, you know, that kind of movement. He kind of tends to say that the resistance to evolution is all mechanical. Like generally, he says that the only sort of resistance to development is mechanicalness or ignoranceness or unconsciousness, you know. So you almost like suggests here that everybody in one sense thinks that they're doing good, you know. Even like you take like a Hitler or someone, it's almost like he says that everybody thinks that they're kind of doing good or trying to achieve the good, you know, something, an aim that seems good to them, although obviously that can be completely, you know, the opposite to the truth. But he kind of says then, so most of what we would think to be bad stuff only occurs due to ignorance, you know, like he says, like 99% of the time. So he kind of says there isn't really much what you could say conscious negativity or evil or resistance to evolution. You know, he says like, thank God. But he does say that there is some kind of, at certain points or sometimes, there is conscious resistance to evolution. So yeah, again, that can appear to be contrary to his thing, that consciousness is always you know, evolutionary in its nature, and that there can't, you know, be conscious resistance, you know, to evolution. So in terms of the work, or like in Beelzebub's Tales, there's the idea of, I suppose, the different kinds of Hasnamus. So like one kind could be a being who does get a certain amount of conscious development, like a certain amount of higher being bodies or some development like that. But something can be not quite right. You know, they can still have a certain higher degree of development or higher body, but not have, let's say, conscience in it, or not some further potential for development. Maybe they brought something up that's like an impurity or whatever, you know, a limitation. So it kind of says that a person or being in that situation can come to the moment of death, then let's say, then in whatever form it is for the body, and can realize its situation. You know, say that it realizes that it's going to die and it's not going to be a good fate because it's got this limitation or this impurity, you know, and that there can be a rebellion, you know, against that, you know, and so it can engage in certain actions to try to maintain its own existence, and those actions can be in the form of acting against, you could say, the other evolutionary people or beings, you know, by like feeding off them or resisting their, you know. So yeah, he does say that there is a kind of conscious form of resistance, but he also seems to suggest, well, along with that, that is needed, you know, that even conscious resistance ultimately kind of gets used or serves a purpose. And he says one of the hallmarks of like how the conscious resistance is used is by its ignorance. So in a way, it mirrors the kind of the ignorance of the common man or the involutionary, you know, level, but in a different, a conscious level. You see what I mean? Like those higher beings, then relatively, who are conscious and live.
I always found that bit quite confusing, actually, but you put that really well, because I used to think, what's he trying to say here? Is he saying there's a dark force trying to stop what's happening, or is he saying that this, like what you're saying, something has to go against it, has to be needed because perhaps it creates a special energy that's needed or something? I just couldn't quite get it.
Well, it's like in general, there's the involution, the down current, and the evolution, the up current. And so those two are needed. They need each other. So relative, let's say if you're moving up, then the current that you're moving against is resistance. If I'm trying to evolve, then I'm meeting against the down current, the involution. I'm trying to work against that. But if I was in the other position, if I was coming down, then you could say that again, flipped around, I meet a certain amount of resistance from the evolutionary current coming up against me. So whichever position you're from, you need a back current, a current against you to some degree. And that's what you work with. So that's one form of resistance. So he says the general form of resistance is involutionary, or is mechanical. You know, regardless of which direction you're coming from, the resistance that you 99% of the time meet with is relative to you. You could say mechanical. You know, that's the denying force to your affirming force. But he says there is this other niche aspect, a different kind of resistance that can be there, that is conscious resistance. That's different, you know, different kind of resistance to the automatic resistance that you meet, you know, the relative mechanical resistance to you. And that even these more rare conscious individuals who are resisting, even they serve a purpose, but the way they serve it is by some kind of form of deception, you could say, because he says that being, that conscious resisting being, gets to a point where, yeah, maybe they see a not pleasant fate, and then they see an opportunity to be able to like maintain their own existence. But he says that effort to maintain their own existence could only last so long. It can't go on forever. They will at some point, you know. So he kind of says it's counterproductive to do that. It's like, why bother? You know, why bother to try to maintain your existence and stop this fate happening if you're only going to get a few more, you know, you could say days. And in order to do that, you might have to do certain nefarious things. Relatively, you might have to become, like, say, a source of conscious resistance to other conscious beings, you know. So he says that, yeah, the beings who do that, they kind of, it's not worth it anyway. They're just like shooting themselves in the foot, you could say. It's something that they can't achieve, and that you could say is maybe relatively putting themselves in a worse position. But again, that conscious resistance is just another source of a different kind of energy that can potentially be used, you know, be worked with. But obviously, it would have to be worked with in a kind of a roundabout way, you know. So he says that the true sort of evolutionary force, though it's much more powerful than these individual conscious resisting forces, in given cases they can like succeed or continue to maintain their existence, but only for a certain time before they will. So it's like saying evil, if you called that evil, can triumph over good in small, limited situations. But on the whole, obviously, there is evolution, and the good, you could say, always wins. You know, if you want to put it in those terms of good and evil. But the good is obviously by its nature limited, even though it's more powerful. It's limited, more limited in the means that it can use. You know.
That was just fantastic. That was really helped me loads, actually. Well, I'm really glad we discussed this.
Yeah, great. I'm just checking check the time again. Okay. So yeah, if I just rush through the next bit.
Yeah, go
So
for it. Yeah.
he says that yeah, man has this purpose, but depending on your individual man's level of being, he will be able to interact with that purpose in a different way, or occupy a different like rung on the ladder of the different roles that you can play. You know, and that you could say the higher up roles represent the inner circle of humanity, like the true esoteric side. So it's like, you know, you work your way from the exoteric to the mesoteric to the esoteric, and the esoteric is the, like truly the truth, you could say, the real more inner side of the religion or the teaching, you know, you're dealing with. And he kind of says that, I think he says in this chapter about if there was 200 conscious people, 200 people in that have occupied that top or central inner esoteric inner circle, so that would be enough to like stop all wars and stuff on Earth. And so, like, he raises the question of, is there that many people already or not? Or if there is, then maybe what we think to be peace isn't what's actually needed, or maybe there is some other problems, you know. So he brings that into question. And again, he raises that idea about the difference between like quality and quantity. Like, he's always suggesting that the inner circle is always by definition, by being inner, is like smaller than the outer, except if you've got the TARDIS. Doctor Who, the sci-fi, the inner in that case is bigger, but usually the inner is, you know, smaller than the outer. So they use kind of a difference in numbers to represent the difference in quality. Like, obviously, like if there's a higher level of quality, number becomes less important, you know, because you could say the individual units become more, you know, more active. They have more potential. It's like if you took a certain number of things up into a higher level, they would multiply, if you could say, not really, but they would become more powerful. That's kind of like this idea in one sense of the loaves and the fishes and stuff. That relatively one way of expressing bringing something up to a higher level on our level, that would appear like miraculous multiplication, because we're just used to that. We have to use a physical kind of sensory metaphor for that development, or that extra power that you gain by, you know, being at a high level. But yeah, so he suggests these 200 conscious people possibly around, and maybe this inner circle is playing some role. But of course, we can be aware of that depending on what level we occupy. If I'm at a lower level, then it might seem as absent to me, or maybe I think I see it, but I might be mistaken that, you know, seeing its opposite. So he raises that question of like how you can become connected to like the exoteric, the first sort of layer of the inner layer of, you know, humanity. First sort of inner room is the exoteric room, and then the next room within that's the mesoteric, and then the room within that, you know, like the Russian dolls. So to get to the first outer room, we need something. Like he says, we exist at a lower level to the exoteric. It takes work for us to become connected to the outer circle, you know. We live in a kind of like underworld, and he says that realm the realm that's outside the exoteric realm is kind of the confusion of tongues, you know, in the Bible and stuff like that, where there can't really be any understanding between people, even though there can appear to be understanding and communication about basic things. Like I can say, oh, pass me that cup of tea, and you'll do it. So there appears to be communication at that level. And also we appear to be able to talk about ideas then and higher things that seem to have communication. But he says that really there isn't kind of any communication at this level, even though there appears to be. Like there's something else at work that makes that seem to be the case. You know, something else at work. There's something else at work that makes us think that communication is happening, rather than our own efforts to make it, you know, happen. So he suggests that there's a kind of a problem to being able to recognize, obviously from whatever position you're in, the next higher stage or inner stage to where you are. And he gives the example of like going to visit a school or temple, and saying that the very temple can have these like series of inner courtyards. And you might go to the temple and might just look around and think it's just a normal, you know, temple, and maybe you go and visit a few of the courtyards, but you don't get to see all of them. And you don't think that there's anything special going on there. But he says that it could be a real school, you know, but it could just appear to be an average church, you know. So like he's saying that already you need something to be able to recognize it, you know, to be able to see that there's something else going on there, or maybe for them to recognize you and like invite you in. And that also suggests that the school, any school, specifically kind of a fourth way one, doesn't have to have any particular form of appearance. You know, it doesn't have to look like people reading Gurdjieff from Beelzebub. You could, you know, in some building with grounds, maybe you could go to a restaurant and it could be happening in there, and you would, right in front of you, you wouldn't know. Maybe you might, you know, suggest that the work can take really radically different forms, or forms that aren't apparent, you know, on the surface to people. You know, like, it's a strange thing to ponder. There could be a Gurdjieff school where no mention of Gurdjieff, maybe no mention of any spiritual ideas, and it just appeared to be a business school. You know, but the ideas there could still be that interaction going on under the surface, you know, but only visible to people who had the eyes to see it.
Yeah, you've got to look for the signs.
Yeah.
Or be giving, I'm not saying you've got, like you were saying, you don't walk around with Beelzebub's towels in your hands hoping someone will spot you. But hopefully, you know, if there was a teacher or a master out there, they might recognize you through your, I don't know, your charisma, your aura, the way you walk, or, you know, because it does change you, doesn't it, doing this kind of work?
Yeah.
Because you become that truth seeker.
Yeah, just also that idea that the work, or any like higher level of work, you know, more inner level of work, can not be obvious to a person at a different level or lower level. Like I said, that I could go to something that looked like a business school, spend time there, maybe and study in this business school, and maybe what's actually being taught is the work, and I just go through it and get my business degree and don't realize that I've been through a fourth way school. Like, he almost suggests it is as radical as that you could be in a school and not know about it, or vice versa. You're in a school that's obviously a school, and you think you're participating and learning what the real work or what it's about, and then the school finishes, and then you go on to teach. Like he says, this is what normally happens in schools. The vast majority of people go to school, they witness what they think is the work, but they're only witnessing it from a less than exoteric point of view. So then when they leave the school, they set up something that they think is the work, but it's not. You know, it's an imitation of even the exoteric level. You know, it's a lower version of that, you know. So it's just, yeah, it's quite radical. A, you could be in a school and not know about it, or B, you could be in it and not really see anything, or even see things that are completely opposed to it. And so there is that different idea in the work that it has no strict structure or set form. He says that differentiates the fourth way from all the others, is that the fourth way has no static set form, and like maybe you could say it has no institution, which is like the thing about why we got foundations and, you know, institutions then. So he says that the schools are only supposed to come into being for a certain amount of time. They serve a purpose, you know. So of course they could get away by saying, well, we are serving a purpose. There might appear to be no time limit on that. But generally you think any school is only within the time limit of the inception teacher, you know, because it kind of disappears when he dies, or when he says it's done, it's supposed to have completed its job, you know. So yeah, what he says about the work there is very can appear very different to how it's become in terms of the formalized work. You know, that could appear to be odd, or you'd have to say that maybe they are still serving, these schools serving a particular purpose. But yeah, he says there's no static form, so that means that the schools could appear any which way. Like we said, like a business school or a monastery, from that whole, you know, a stripper joint.
The
Literally.
circus, that's always been my
Yeah,
favorite.
that's what I'm saying. It could be present in all of those forms, like really, that you could do, you know, and not obviously evident to someone who didn't, I don't know, have the eyes to see it. So another way to put it. But yeah, so to get to that inner circle, he says there's kind of 4 gates, and they represent 4 different ways. You know, the way of the monk and the fakir and the yogi, and the fourth one being the fourth way. So that kind of suggests that they're all equal in a way, that different people might need different ways. So it's not the case that the fourth way is the right way and the other 3 are just distorted versions of it. Or at least that's what he appears to suggest in that chapter, that piece of writing, that they're all equal, and that different people might need to go, you know, might be fated, you know, to go on a different way. So it might not be right for someone to go on a different way, even if we consider that other way to be the true way, or the more, you know, the more real way, the less watered down way, or whatever, you know.
Well, the other way is still a way, isn't it? It's someone who's gone on a path of truth seeking, even if they're just coming in from either the monk gear or yogi way. It's a way.
Yeah, yeah.
They're eager. They want to go forward.
Well, he says that there is like these four gates, like imagine a circle with four, gates into the middle, and they're like the objective. That there are those objective ways, and so they might correspond to different people's needs. So obviously there is the tendency for everybody to take their way as the right way, and the others are wrong, or in some form, or partial misunderstandings of our way. Yeah. So like those people who maybe be in a real school and then leave it, but they haven't really seen what it's about, so they create an imitation version. So at one level, that's producing bad results, you could say. It's producing an imitation version of the work that can even be opposed to the true work. So theoretically, it's just creating deception in people. But it's like, say, even though at one level, yeah, that's a problem, that even that imitation way can serve a purpose, because it can serve potentially as a means to bring people, you could say, to the real. It's like it occupies another level. Do you see what I mean on that connection? Like the imitation school, even though it's way down on the, it still occupies a ladder. So it can be a means for people to move up. Do you see what I mean? Like somebody could come across a fake school, and maybe by somehow or other that actually made them able to come to a real one. So it's just like, again, there can be all these different levels of these different roles that can be played. Even the imitation can have a particular use, even though it's more limited than the authentic. Yeah. So I think he kind of, in one sense, the chapter is also about like, self-initiation. Like we can have all these teachings and rituals and conditions, but at the end of the day, it's about how some interaction, some action has to be our own, from the core of me, I, authentic, that's going to be able to transform whatever the way or the material is that we're given.
I think that's really important because, especially when so many of his pupils he sent away, and I think that's what he was trying to do. I've given you the teaching, now you go and work with it. But so many people just want to go and stay with their teacher because they feel safe, secure, and they feel like they're doing the right thing, when really it's about learning from whoever, whether it's Gurdjieff, Jesus, Muhammad, Buddha, whoever, and then you take it with you and go and live your life using it and spreading it, hopefully.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, like you say, that it's a mixture, of course, a balance of like things you're given and your own efforts and stuff. But yeah, like you say, there's some point where something true, authentic, something that's your own has to come into play, and it's only that's going to be able to make this this really significant step or transformation. Something that can't be given to you outside, or can't be given to you outside. It's not going to be dependent on even the best conditions in the world could be given to you. There still has to be something coming from within, the inner. And so there are all these questions about what, if you're given the best conditions and that doesn't determine it, what determines it? But anyway, I think we'll have to leave it there, Debbie.
That's fine. No, it's been brilliant. I've really enjoyed it, Josh. Do you want to just quickly mention your WordPress?
Yeah. It's if you go to the WordPress site, people, and type in the tapestry of Beelzebub's tales, then they should find it.
Wonderful. Thank you, Josh. And I'm debbie-elliott.co.uk. So check out all our works. Thank you again. That's marvellous.
Thank you, Debbie. Good to see you as always. And hopefully we'll have another chat soon. Yeah. Yes, take care.
Definitely. I always enjoy them.